Well, hello, everybody, and a very warm welcome along to Real Israel and the first of our second series of programs here at What the Israeli Papers Say. My name's Paul Alster, and I'm delighted to say that for this pre-Israeli election edition, we have three wise men, three regular contributors to the program. We'll be speaking to Rami Lador, the former Executive Vice President of Bank Hapoalim in the Southeast Asia Division, to Benjamin Weinthal, the Europe correspondent of the Jerusalem Post, also a fellow at the US-based Foundation for the Defense of Democracies, and to Peter Lerner, the former IDF spokesperson and now Director General of the International Relations Division at the Histadrut-General Federation of Labor in Israel. So to all three of you, welcome along.
Thank you.
Good to be here.
Well, it's a case of here we go again, isn't it? We're going back to the polls next week, and we all know the reasons why the elections have come to pass, because of the breakdown of the coalition between blue and white principally and the Likud. And this is going to be our fourth election in 2 years, which does seem quite extraordinary, I'm sure, to many people that are viewing from outside of the Israel bubble. But I just want to ask you guys, first of all, we're closing in on Passover and Pesach, and the question is, why is this night different from every other night? Why is this election going to be different from every other election, or is it going to be more of the same? I'll come to you first, Rami Lador.
I don't know if it's going to be any different, except that the feelings among the citizens here, the public in Israel, are probably more sour. People are fed up. They're fed up with the system not being able to create a government. They're fed up with the chasing of the politicians one after each other. All the issues seem to just repeat themselves with no solution. So people are fed up. Many do not believe that the fourth election will not yield anything better than just the fifth elections. And we'll talk, I guess, more about it later.
Okay, Benjamin, would you share that view expressed by Rami there?
Well, I share the view that Israel's experiencing, I guess, the American version of that film Groundhog Day, and the German version of the philosopher Nietzsche's idea of the eternal reoccurrence of the same. And I think there is, with respect to Rami, a sense of sort of frustration. But on the other hand, I think there is sort of also a sense of optimism because of the relaxation of COVID rules, and perhaps that'll be a factor in this election in terms of how Bibi Netanyahu has managed the COVID crisis.
Yeah, we'll come to that in just a few moments, I'm sure. But Peter, your view of where we are at this point?
I think the best way to describe how I feel at this moment is a paraphrase from AC/DC's Highway to Hell. I think we're just on the highway to election number 5.
Really? You believe that there isn't going to be any conclusive result? Indeed, the latest polls today from a number of organizations put the two divisions virtually neck and neck. Do you think anything is going to change in the final week of electioneering to maybe see one side gain the advantage above the other?
So for the most of the last 2 months, the polls have been saying almost the same. You haven't seen a huge fluctuation towards one side or another. It's always been almost balanced, perhaps 1 or 2 mandates to this side or 1 or 2 mandates to that side. No substantial challenge. So I think out of the whole process, what we've seen over the last 2 months leading up into to Tuesday, will be the missing component of the undecided. And I think this is a huge issue, because it's anything between 12 and 18 mandates, and that could flip and change the situation. But even if there is a substantial change and Likud get 40 mandates, or Lapid gets 35 mandates, the balance of power between the parties will still mean that we will have an unstable parliament and government. And that means that election number 5 will, if it won't happen later this year, so it'll happen in a year's time or in a year and a half's time, because any government that I see in the way things is actually playing out today appears to be unstable and no clear change of reality that would create the stability that we so much desire.
Paul,
yeah.
I may follow
yes,
up
Benjamin,
on
please.
Peter raised just a very significant point about the undecideds and that percentage. And this is a guessing game, but it would be nice, in my view, if Bibi Netanyahu actually debates Lapid from Yesh Atid. There hasn't been a debate in Israel since, I believe, 1996. I think Shimon Peres last debated Bibi Netanyahu, and then Netanyahu went on to win the election. But maybe a debate is a new variable that could mix up the election. I would actually wish to have a debate among all the candidates, but I suspect that won't happen.
Yeah, a debate between the guys seen as the two front runners, the leaders of the two likely largest parties, Benjamin Netanyahu and Yair Lapid, would be interesting. There was some talk in the newspapers in the last 24 hours of Netanyahu saying that he might be prepared to do it if they can find a mediator, a presenter that is agreeable to both sides. Rami Lador, do you think Yair Lapid would fare well if he went head-to-head with Bibi Netanyahu in a live televised debate?
I think that's a very theoretical question, because I cannot see Bibi Netanyahu going into a live debate with Yair Lapid for his simple experience a few years back when Yitzhak Mordechai told him, Bibi, look me in the eyes. You know that you're really full of lies, that you're not telling the truth, and you know that I know, so why? Something in that sort, and he really, really embarrassed Netanyahu, and I believe that's sort of a trauma for Netanyahu. Netanyahu is doing all sorts of spins and all sorts of rumors. He's initiating them. At the end of the day, he will not have a one-on-one debate with Yair Lapid or with Bennett or with Gideon Sa'ar, because the whole issue of these people is not about issues, it's about his ability to lead a country when he is indicted for bribery, indicted for breach of trust, and for fraud. And the whole issue of the election is the non-issues that are not spoken, and people call it the boring elections. The issue is whether you're for Bibi or against Bibi. And the whole election seems to now focus into the 10 candidates by the polls candidate, Naftali Bennett, who will not really commit that he will not sit in a government that Bibi leads, Benjamin Netanyahu leads. He is not committing to it, although he thinks Benjamin Netanyahu has totally failed. He used the most harsh words for failure, kishalon, about Bibi's government, yet he won't say that he won't sit with him. All the others, except the ultra-religious, say anything that happens, we will not sit with Bibi. So now the debate in Israel about this whole election, whether you will or will not accept Netanyahu as Israel's next prime minister. I think those who will accept them, and the Likud presently has 30 mandates in the polls, are, we call them Bibistim, people who are like Paron. They just believe in the person, not in his ideology. They accept him for whatever he does. There was even been a sort of a promotion of a choir of children from Jerusalem singing in beautiful choir-like voices, Bibi the king, our beloved king. And this is the way they feel about Netanyahu, whereas the other side of the political spectrum today is only Bibi is not qualified morally, ethically, or time-wise, because he has to be 3 days in a week from 9 o'clock in the morning to 3 o'clock in the afternoon in the judicial court in Jerusalem. So that's
okay. Well,
yes, Bibi, no Bibi.
Okay, well, that's been the issue for the last 3 or 4 elections. Peter, just coming to you, as far as the cult of Bibi Netanyahu, is this totally unhealthy for Israeli politics, or do you have to give it to the guy that he has done something for Israel and kept us on the map? And as far as the COVID is concerned, he would say that it's because of him that Israel is the first out of lockdown.
You are asking me to comment and credit Netanyahu. This is a huge challenge for me, and I defended the state of Israel in the hardest situations on earth.
Yeah.
I'd say this: Netanyahu has been prime minister for so long now. He has, obviously, there's a lot of credit and things that he can take to his credit, and his efforts in bringing the vaccines in mass in a timely way. And then utilizing the national systems in order to distribute them and inoculate the population were good. And people all from around the world are coming here to learn how we did it. Saying that, I think Netanyahu has had enough time at the helm. He needs to leave the public stage and let Israel progress. If he was, there are three issues of this election. We talked about the issue of the undecided. We haven't talked about the fringes of not crossing the threshold. But I think what Rami and Benjamin were talking about, the centrality of Netanyahu, he is the Uber campaigner of Israel. He is the man that sets the tone and tempo for everything that is happening. Now, just imagine this. If he was as passionate about running the country as he is about running the campaign, Israel would be in a total state of progress all the time. Unfortunately, we see him involved in other issues, and these are the issues that have been raised in court, and these are the issues that are, I would say, part and parcel of Israeli politics, being constantly in crosshairs of ultra-Orthodox, of settlement activities, of international activities, of so on and so on. But the progress of the dynamism and the passion that we see in his campaign, we don't see it in everything else. And I think that is the reason that I say that he's been at the helm for long enough. We need somebody to come with passion of progress for the state of Israel. I don't know. Was that a compliment or not? I don't know. I mean, I'm trying to.
I think you did. I think you drew on all your years of experience there to put together a very rounded case there, Peter. Thanks very much for that. I'm going to move to Benjamin Weinthal with regard to Bibi Netanyahu. And just your view on the point of the cult of Bibi. There's probably a whole generation of young people who can barely remember a prime minister that wasn't Bibi Netanyahu. Do you think that is something that is a major factor that he has on his side whenever he goes to the ballot box?
Well, I do. I mean, there are billboards in Tel Aviv right now from Blue and White, Benny Gantz's party, that state to the effect, Benny Gantz in the Knesset or Bibi forever. And again, pointing to this theme that Israel's had a prime minister now for over a decade. That is a very long time. There haven't
this
been
time
that
around.
many prime ministers or presidents in democracies who have been in power that long, with the exception of Angela Merkel, who's going to step down from power this year in Germany. But the cult factor is sort of an interesting topic because he has, on the one hand, as Peter mentioned, he has navigated the COVID crisis well. I think from a detached, objective perspective, one has to give him credit. On the other hand, he's embroiled in, as Rami mentioned, corruption, a major corruption trial that impedes his effectiveness. I think that's an obvious fact that needs to be stated. How effective can a prime minister be when he's involved in that type of process? And the question is, will that weigh on Israeli voters? And based on the past elections, it hasn't swayed the electorate to the extent that I would have predicted. I mean, my preference is, I guess, to have a prime minister who's not involved in corruption trials and can devote his resources to the extraordinary challenges Israel faces and build on the Abraham Accords. I recall Garry Kasparov, in my view, the history's greatest chess player, recently gave an interview to an Israeli television station. He was asked about Netanyahu. He also commented in a very diplomatic way that when a prime minister is in office for a very long time, he doesn't think it's a good idea. So my recommendation would be to have term limits in Israel, if that's ever possible. Yes. But I'm frequently not listened to, but that's my recommendation.
Well, we're listening. I promise you, Benjamin, we are listening, and we appreciate that view. And obviously,
the policymakers.
Well, the policymakers, maybe not. I want to ask you, with regard, let's leave Netanyahu out of this and look at the other parties that are there, because Netanyahu on his own will not be able to form a government with the Likud. It might seem strange to people outside of the Israel bubble that Netanyahu could win the election with 25% of the vote if he gets 30 seats, which in any other country would never be enough to be a leader. But our system demands coalition politics. Now, among the other front-runner parties, we have Yair Lapid's centrist party. We have the two parties also to the right, that of Gidon Saar, who has launched his new party of late, and Naftali Bennett. We also have the Labour Party that were in some disarray, beginning to show signs of a revival. And there's the Russian Immigrant Party as well, of Avigdor Lieberman. Now, I'll come to Peter first, actually, on this one. Of those parties, obviously, I understand that you support the Labour Party and that they are starting to rise in the polls under Merav Michaeli. Do you think she's going to have any part at all to play in the coalition wheeler dealing after the votes have been cast?
I certainly hope so. I'd say this. I joined the Labour Party last November in a situation where it was before the elections were announced, and where everybody was saying that the Labour, the Avodah, have fulfilled its historic mission in life and have to pass into the afterlife. But my sense of the need for Labour Zionism, a Labour Zionism that embodies the distinct version of Jewish destiny as a free nation, building a just society and safeguarding it, meant for me that I had to join this party no matter what their future would be. And what we've seen since the elections were announced, we've seen Merav Michaeli take the leadership out of I would say, the old school, old guard type of Amir Peretz. She's created a list which is a reflection of Israeli society, from military men to Arabs to reform rabbis. You have a very, very interesting list. And I definitely hope that they will have a larger influence on the narrative and the discourse within Israeli society, because I think it will make a more just, more equal society that is required, especially, I mean, if we've learned anything from COVID-19, it's the institutions laid by the Israeli labor movement that have helped the Israeli public come through, whether it's the Kupot-Cholim, the health services, the medical services in the hospitals, whether it's the National Institution of Insurance that is paying out for the furlough. So everything there means that we need to have a good safety net for society, and I hope that Merav Michaeli will be at the table. As I said, when I joined in November, everybody was predicting 0 mandates. Now the polls are suggesting 6. Some polls have had her up to 7, but 6, from my perspective, would be a huge success compared to where we came in. Will that mean that there will be a substantial player at the table? Not necessarily, but we have a new Israeli Labour Party, which is kicking and making a lot of noise. You know, what she did, one of the first steps she did in the party, and I won't go into this too long, she created a situation where every other person would be female. So create an equal state playing ground in the party, and that forced all of the other parties to place women at the leadership. So I think that is something that we need to look out for, and these are the types of steps that we need to be involved in, and that's why Labour Party is so important for coming out of COVID crisis.
Well, I think as somebody sitting in the middle, a sort of impartial, I think it's good for Israeli democracy if the Labour Party survives. You need balance in politics in order to bring clear thinking on all sides. Rami Lador, to come to you, Yair Lapid in the centre, the main challenger to Bibi Netanyahu, but how much do you think he will be able to work with the likes of Gideon Sa'ar or Naftali Bennett? Could those three come together and set their ego aside and form a bloc big enough to oust Netanyahu, do you think?
The answer is I think he can, but I wanted one comment to Peter. You remind me of a show I saw in Broadway about a white painting. The three fellows who were friends, one of them bought for a huge amount of money, and all it was a white painting. I couldn't tell, and I really follow the papers, the difference between Meretz and Avodah, of Labor and Meretz. I couldn't tell the difference between Shas and the Yadut HaTorah. I couldn't tell the difference between Benny Gantz and Yair Lapid, Yesh Atid and Blue and White. I couldn't tell the difference between Bennett and essentially all the Zionist parties are preaching, are saying the same thing, only with a different leader. We're not going to talk anymore about it, but about where's Netanyahu in this story. I think people should give a chance to Yair Lapid. Yair Lapid has been 9 years in politics, actually since 2012. He's been in politics. He's proven that he's consistent. He's proven that he's true, and he will honor his own word. He will not change what he declares in the election time, as opposed to Benny Gantz and many of the other politicians, especially Aryeh Deri, who gave his personal guarantee to Benny Gantz that he will be rotated to the position of prime minister in the rotation. There are no differences between them, and it's a matter of who do you trust. Now, within not knowing what the party's agendas are for the future, for the West Bank, for the economics of the country, for anything, for the society, for the relations between minorities in Israel, nobody really knows, nobody really reads that. All they know is that Bennett will not sit in a government that Yair Lapid leads. Avigdor Lieberman will not sit in a government with the Haredim, with the ultra-Orthodox. Gideon Sa'ar will not, everybody will not sit with some, it's so complex, and we go back to the first question of the fifth election. I hope people will be smart enough to look at a party that's relatively new, with good people, strong people that reflect all areas and avenues of Israel's society and good people, and that is a Yesh Atid that Yair Lapid has brought together. And just to bring you a small example, it doesn't make one be a prime minister, but just as a small example, one of the economic issues in Israel is the gaps between the haves and have-nots. Yesh Atid, for the last 8 years that they've been in the Knesset, have refused any raise in the Knesset members' salaries. They always donated to charitable organizations, just to show that they feel the country, they represent the people. And for me, since others have proven they cannot be trusted, maybe Yesh Atid will continue to be trusted.
So for Rami, essentially what you're saying is it's time for a new broom. But I'm going to come to Benjamin, because as far as the possibility of parties working together, there's all the horse trading going on behind the scenes, Benjamin. Do you think any of the centre and right-wing parties, and even including Labour as well, might be able to set their differences aside if they genuinely want to turn over a new page and have a government that isn't led by Netanyahu?
I mean, Whether Bennett and Saar would set aside those differences, I think that's a bit of an uphill battle. In theory, it's possible, but Rami mentioned there are so many moving parts here. Israeli politics is just enormously complex. It's the most sophisticated political chess game out there. I mean, I've been following this stuff for decades, and I still miss all moving parts all the time. So to answer your question, I guess it could happen. I don't think it's highly likely.
Well, of course, we've only got a few days until we actually find out. I just want your view very quickly, because we're coming into sort of the last 5 minutes or so of the program. Your view as to whether or not the far right wing settler party of Otzma Yehudit and Itamar Ben-Gvir should even be allowed to take part in the elections. Rami, very quickly, you're shaking your head. What is your view on this guy?
That hurts. A guy that actually had in his living room a picture of Dr. Baruch Goldstein, who went into an Arab, what do you call the tomb of in Hebron, Me'arat HaMachpelah.
The Patriarch.
And he actually shot 29 people to death just because they happened to be Arabs. Itamar Ben-Gvir, who's number 3 on Smotrich's list, has actually put a picture of that hero of his in his living room. I think it's such a disgrace for Israel's democracy that such a person will be in the Israeli Knesset, and it really, really shocks me. I want to say one word about the results of the election. A lot of it depends on the 3.25% needed to achieve in popular vote in order to get in the Knesset. That means the minimum amount you can get is 4 mandates in order to get in. And if there's about 4 parties who are just at very close to that benchmark, if they don't make it, that will change all the results.
Yes, this is the minimum threshold we're talking about of 3.25%. For people that don't know, any party that doesn't poll above 3.25, they don't get any seats in parliament. And Peter, obviously there is the question about these parties that might not make the threshold, Meretz being one of them, the farther left party. But just going back to Itamar Ben-Gvir, a very controversial character, should he even be allowed to be in the election, or is this part of the democratic process?
So you keep dishing me out these questions to protect these.
Yes or no?
No, I think there's no legal prevention from Ben-Gvir from running. I think there is a moral prevention that he should not be permitted. But unfortunately, it's the law of the land that permits him to be a candidate. And obviously, I don't agree with him, and I think it's terrible. And as Rami rightly said, it would be disgraceful if he gets in. I think that the whole, the 3.25 threshold can also, the side that loses most of those numbers, the alternate side or the other side gains more influence. So if the extreme right parties don't cross the threshold, then automatically the left-leaning or the center-left automatically gains more influence over the ability to construct a coalition. So it will be the fringe and it will be the fringe parties, together with the undecided, together with the center of Netanyahu, which ultimately will determine what happens. And in any case, we're on the highway to number 5.
Benjamin, just coming to you, a word about Itamar Ben-Gvir and also the fact that Benjamin Netanyahu is in some ways lending him a helping hand by offering to give any votes that are not used for mandates to Ben-Gvir to help him get in and survive. And also the threshold point about it being a very significant factor that could sway the balance.
Well, I agree with Peter and Rami. I don't think he, there's no legal barrier, as Peter mentioned, but certainly there's an ethical question. And, I'm not someone who, when candidates are glorifying terrorists, whether from the right or the left, or Israeli Arab candidates are glorifying Islamic terrorists, I think they're just they should be disqualified on ethical grounds. Obviously, Israel has a very robust democracy and tolerates this type of glorification of terrorists and rhetoric, at least rhetorically, I mean, from a free speech perspective. On the threshold question, I'm sort of a divided self. I mean, I think this threshold should be raised even higher. I think I mentioned this on a previous program, to avoid the fragmentation of democracy. But as I mentioned, I'm a divided self. On the other hand, I do think it's good to have small parties who can represent these constituencies that are neglected. So I guess I'm leaning these days toward this percentage of 3.5 or 3.25, excuse me, right?
At the moment,
because it'll promote more inclusion right now in very polarized times. So my view is sort of more fluid on this question, and I think Peter's analysis is right about how the election's going to play out. I'm really hoping that we're not on the AC/DC highway to hell to election 5, as Peter said at the outset of the program. And I've been listening to AC/DC recently from his country of birth, Australia, if I'm not mistaken. No?
No, he's British.
Oh, British. Excuse me. My ear for that accent is dissipating. Apologies.
You're excused.
But the main problem is again, do we want later this year to experience a 5th election? And it's very costly, and it's going to probably create some more political alienation, I suspect.
I suspect you might be right. I'm just going to come to Rami Lador for a quick word, but the one person we haven't really said very much about is the guy that was going to be the Prime Minister in rotation, Benny Gantz, whose party is one of those parties that is close to the threshold. Does anybody think that Gantz will pass the threshold? I'll come to you, Rami, first, very quickly for a word.
Well, it's funny that he said Gantz, because that's a comment I decided I must make. I started out with a gloomy atmosphere here, and I thought the only way to end this thing is with upbeat and something very, very positive about Israel. And that is last Friday, 5 days ago, I went to a town hall meeting with Benny Gantz. Benny Gantz is the alternate prime minister of Israel. He's Minister of Security, of Defense of Israel. He's someone that's very, very powerful, very, very powerful. And here I am, I get up, and I gave a speech of about 3 minutes, basically cutting him down to shreds for allowing Bibi Netanyahu to be prime minister again. And why is it so positive? At the end of the day, I came home and nobody took my number, nobody photoed me. I felt like a free citizen still in a democratic country, me, just a private citizen, being able to confront in front of other people, the alternate prime minister and the minister of security, and not fearing for anything, but if I won't get my truth out. And nothing, everybody either agreed with me or didn't agree with me there, but I appreciated the fact that I can still sound my voice just like in this program.
Well, I appreciate you sharing that with us. And of course, as opposed to some of the other politicians, including Benjamin Netanyahu, when the lady up in the north tried to complain about the lack of a clinic there, she was thrown out of the meeting, and because Bibi wasn't happy to have any dissent from the public while he was speaking. But just very quickly, just to finish, a show of hands. Are we going to fifth elections? Are we all agreed? Fifth elections coming up by the end of the year, most likely?
Can I vote already for the sixth?
2.5, 3.
Can I vote already?
I think it's very possible. Well, guys, thanks very much. We'll have to wait and see what happens. We're going to be watching very closely. And of course, once the elections have happened, that's when the action really begins, because all the horse trading and deals goes on. But Peter, for you, I hope the Labour Party does well. For you, Rami, I hope the centre with the Yesh Atid or whatever you're going to vote for. And Benjamin, wherever you're placing your vote, I hope it is reflected favourably within the coalition. And thank you to you all for joining us here at Real Israel. And hopefully after the elections, we'll come back and do it all over again. Thanks very much for joining us, you three. And thanks everybody out there for watching What the Papers Say. We'll be back with another edition after election number 4. Bye-bye for now.